Hey guys, Logan here from Popular Woodworking Magazine. So I was looking through my lumber stash the other day and I found this random piece of red cedar that I cut from a sawmilling project a couple years ago. It's dry, but it has some cracks in it. I have kind of a wind shake along the edge, has some dry rot in the center, which we kind of get in the middle of Iowa. So while I was looking at it, I thought this would be a fun little project to make into a little outdoor bench. And to do that, I'm not going to do it kind of our standard style. I'm going to do it using these pieces of red cedar and some of these tenon cutters from Lumberjack Tools. Now we do sell these, you can get them from Lumberjack Tools as well, but they cut tenons on the end of logs. So this is kind of cabin style furniture. So we're gonna slap this together today. So I think the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna cut our bench seat to whatever size we're going to do. Right now I have this rule laying here at about 40 inches, and I think that's about what I'm gonna go with. That gives us enough room for two people to sit on the bench. And I might gently curve the ends. I don't know, we'll see what happens when I get to the bandsaw. I'm also gonna shorten the depth a little bit because right now, this thing is about 19 inches deep, and that's pretty deep. I'll probably drop it down to maybe 16 or 15 inches, and then we'll sculpt the edge to make it look like a live edge on both sides. So let's hover to the bandsaw and get this cut. So at the bandsaw, I ripped down this width on this slab, and I went a little off my line on purpose. I kind of went a little curvy so I can mimic a live edge on both sides, which I think is going to be a nice look. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a draw knife, and I'm using it bevel down, and I'm just taking off these corners. Now you can see some areas where it tears out, and that's because I'm going against the grain. So what I'll do is I'll go backwards on those. And that'll help smooth those out. And then once I get down to where I don't necessarily want to be quite a sharp edge, but close, I'll come back with a spoke shave and kind of smooth everything out just so we don't have any rough areas. All right, so I took the bark off that one edge, made a fake live edge, so now we can go ahead and look at the undercarriage and add the legs. Now, this is where I do want to mention something. Using these tenon cutters is significantly easier on wet wood. So this tree may have been growing a week ago, and it's the perfect thing to use. But that causes an issue when you potentially are working with something that is dry as well. So something like this cedar, I mentioned I cut it from a sawmilling project a couple years ago. So if we take our moisture meter and we stick that in there, this is at 10%. So this is really dry. Now, if we bore a hole in this seat, and we cut a tenon on this leg and stick it in there, as this leg dries, it's gonna shrink. And that tenon's gonna shrink in the hole and they're not gonna fit. So you're gonna have legs that start to get loose. I'm sure we've all seen chairs that pop apart. So to fix that, what we're going to do is we're going to use a piece of material that is the same moisture as these guys. So I'm gonna grab another piece of material and rip it in half, stick it down, and screw it to the bench. That way, wet wood is going into wet wood, and then it's screws attaching it here to the bench seat. So now we have to cut tenons on the ends of our legs to attach to the bench. So to do that, we're going to use a safety sled tenon guide on the other end of the bench. Okay, so to cut the tenons on the end of these legs, we're using, as I said, the tenon cutters from Lumberjack Tools. Now, you could use these freehand in a drill. You just have to be careful, make sure you're going on straight and keep that tenon nice and in line with your workpiece that you're working on. Or you can do something like this. And this is the safety sled tenon guide. And as you can see, it holds a drill based on a top handle. So there's a couple of specific drills like this Bosch that will fit this. and then the tenon cutter mounts in those. And this entire thing is on a track that slides in and out as the workpiece is clamped in one of the log clamps. So at this point, I've set a tenon depth here using this stop rod that goes through these slots. And now it's a simple matter of turning the drill on and feeding it onto the workpiece nice and smoothly until the workpiece contacts that stop. That tenon guide guides that cutter nice and straight, so that way it is centered on the workpiece, and as you can see, that's a nice looking tenon, good clean shoulder. Now I did leave these legs a little long. Once we get everything mounted, we'll level those up and cut them to the right length. But now I just gotta make 3 more legs. To drill angled holes, I could use a drill press, but clamping something like round workpieces can be kind of hard. So Lumberjack has this angle drilling guide. Now you can use this to drill plumb holes straight into logs, or you can tilt it at an angle like I've done here. I have this leaning at 15 degrees. And as you can see, I have a log lock here as well. And this is holding one of our runners. And this runner is what our legs are going to mate into. And creating this angle is going to make the splay of the legs and give the bench a little bit wider stance. Now, I've already loaded up a self-feeding bit, and it has a longer center point, so it will grab before the wing starts to cut, which is important when drilling at an angle. And I'm not going to worry about setting a depth stop. There is one over here, but I do want this to go all the way through, because when we're looking at this runner, it's fairly thin. I want as much depth as I can get, and we might even cut the end of our tenons at a little bit of angle to get as much surface area as possible. One of the things you have to remember when working with logs like this is these are natural, not really worked materials, so sometimes they have slight twists, bows, or kinks in them. So what I've done is I've put them in these blocks after I got them drilled, and I rotated each leg around until the 2 legs look like they're pretty much straight in line. And that's important for this next step. That step is going to be marking them for stretchers. We're going to use a stretcher in between each of the individual legs, and then we're going to connect the 2 pairs of legs with 1 stretcher in between the smaller stretchers. So instead of trying to measure stuff, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a compass. And I've set this pretty much as wide as it will go, and I'm going to reference that down on the bottom of the seat. And then I'm just going to scribe a line here, and that's going to be the line to create the hole or the mortise for that stretcher. And we'll do that for all 4 of the legs. So now those should be nice and horizontal once we drill them. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sight down this, and I'm going to give myself just a little bit of a crosshair to where those 2 lines look like they're lining up. So now I'm going to grab a 4-center bit and a hand drill, and I'm actually going to drill these in place, making sure I keep that drill nice and horizontal, want it level going in for both mortises to match. All right, that looks pretty good. So as I'm drilling these, what I'm doing is I'm starting the bit at whatever angle it wants to start at with the leg splay, and then I'm dropping it down, and I'm actually looking at my other mark, and I'm trying to center the back of the drill, the axis of the bit in the back of the drill with this hole to keep it in line with where the stretcher needs to go. And looking at it, it looks like it's in the right place. Now, one thing I will note is that this side had a little bit of a knot and a bump right there, and I knew that was going to interfere with the bit. So what I did is I grabbed a Cuts-All disc and I ground that off nice and flat, and now honestly you won't even notice it's there. So at this point, I'm going to go and measure the center distance between this guy and the stretcher over here, and we'll cut a stretcher to fit, then it's on to glue up. So these stretchers are just attached using a pair of screws and countersink holes, and that's going to work really nicely. So at this point, what I can do is I can install everything and see what this bench looks like once we get it flipped over. And then we'll talk about gluing up, because there is some considerations when you're gluing up a project like this bench with wet wood. Okay, there we go. Now that's sitting pretty well. But what I am going to want to do after I get this glued together is come back and level the top by putting a level on it. And then I'll use shims around each foot. Then I can scribe a line and cut that line off. That way all 4 feet are going to be perfectly flat. So now we can talk about gluing this up. Let me go ahead and flip this back over. Okay, now as I mentioned, a lot of times log furniture like this is done using wet wood. It cuts much easier, it's easy to get, and you don't have to wait for the lumber to dry to build your project. But there are some considerations. We can't use normal glue, woodworking glue, with wet wood. It just won't stick. So instead, we use something called polyurethane glue. And polyurethane glue requires moisture to be activated and to cure. So if you have wet wood, there's a lot of moisture in it, you can use this glue as usual, and it will stick to the pieces. Now do keep in mind though that polyurethane glue will foam up. So when you're applying glue, apply it sparingly, don't use too much, otherwise you're gonna have a lot of squeeze out you're gonna have to clean up. Now one thing you can do is if your wood, this is wet wood still, but it's pretty dry. There's not a ton of surface moisture on it anymore. So what I'll do is I'll actually take a paper towel and just dip it in water. And then I'll wipe that on the tenon, as well as in the mortise. And we're just introducing some moisture into this joint, and then we can go ahead and apply the glue. Now usually what I'll do is I'll apply it into the mortise, and I'll spread it around. Then I'll use a glue brush. This is just the cheap acid brush from a discount store. I'll just wipe that around. And then we'll stick that in place. We'll do the same thing on both side assemblies and then that mill stretcher. All right, so that looks like that's sitting pretty level the way it is, but I will come in and really give this a fine tuning. Plus, I wanna make sure that the height of the seat on here is at about 18 inches. That's a pretty standard chair or bench height. So it might require me trimming off a little bit more on these legs. But I'm gonna wait probably 24 hours for this glue to dry. Once again, it's polyurethane glue, so it's gonna foam. So I'm gonna keep an eye on any squeeze out and clean that up as it pops up. But then I can go ahead and sand this and apply a finish. Now, I like this style of bench, especially for an outdoor bench. This would be a great one for like building for a park department or for a school. This is gonna go outside here in our shop on the porch. So I want a good outdoor finish. So the one I'm gonna use is this one from Old Masters. It's the Ascend Exterior. This comes in gloss matte and satin as well. This is the matte. It's gonna work really well in the cedar. The cedar will look nice, bright, and red, kind of like this once I sand it, but over time it'll turn kind of a darker brown, kind of like this surface is right now. I will hand plane this to get this nice and smooth before I apply finish. But this is a really nice, fun little project that doesn't take a whole lot of time, and working with logs and the tenon cutters is a nice diversion from our traditional furniture work.